Welcome, folks. Welcome to another Sollu Kaburz podcast. And today we are talking about England cricket in the middle of a pandemic. I was very confused because every time I do a cricket podcast, I wear RCB hat and Indian T-shirt. But because we are talking about England, the closest shirt I had was this. So that's the best I could do for this podcast. And the guest today is an English cricket journalist, Sam Morshead. I'll let him introduce himself. But I've been following his work on Twitter, and I love his articles. Can you please tell a little bit about yourself, Sam, so that people know that you're just not just random cricket fan, but you're actually a journalist who follows the game very closely?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on, Najeeb. I'm the digital editor of thecricketer.com. The Cricketer is the oldest cricket magazine in the world. We're celebrating our 100th birthday next year. Published in many countries all around the world, and the website is one of the fastest growing digital cricket channels, so certainly in the UK and hopefully a bit further afield as well. I cover the England team, I cover the county scene, and then I lead a team of guys who try and do our best to cover as much of cricket as we can do.
Right.
So it's been a funny old few months, but an enjoyable time nonetheless.
That is exactly what I was getting to, because when the lockdown was about to happen, right, somewhere in the March and April, what were your initial thoughts like? I mean, because you had a massive summer coming up in England cricket, right? So can you please tell, like, what was at stake, right? So what was at stake, and what really drove the England cricket board to, organize this massive series with such a massive effort, having this bubble with, and, conducting series, calling cricketers from different countries, worst affected countries in some cases. So what was at stake, and what were you thinking in April, March?
Yeah, well, the first thing from the ECB's point of view was that they were trying to mitigate against financial catastrophe. So they've got a huge rights deal with Sky TV over here, which is worth 1.1 billion over the course of 4 years. If they had wiped out this summer, they were potentially looking at losses of around 380 million pounds, which would be, it would spell the end of quite a lot of the structure as we know it in England. So the main priority for them as a governing body was to get international cricket on so they could fill their TV contractual obligations. And that's where the creation of this biosecure arena or arenas came from, and the bubbles that were created around them. A most amazing thing, considering that, before March, no one at the ECB had specific knowledge of how to create this. Then none of them are epidemiologists. They have obviously a senior science advisor, senior medical advisor, Professor Nick Pearce, but no one is an infectious disease expert. No one knows how to put on these big biosecure events. So they had to learn from scratch how to do it, led by Steve Elworthy, the guy who delivered the 2019 World Cup and many ICC tournaments before. And they created these venues at Old Trafford and the Ageas Bowl, which were completely standalone, secure bubbles
Right.
to get into. I went into the Southampton one a couple of times for some Ireland ODIs. You have to, just for journalists, you have to have a swab test in advance. You have to read a 70-page document about what you can and can't do. You have to fill in questionnaires daily about whether you've got symptoms, etc. And you have to download a health passport app. And when you get to the stadium, you have to go through a temperature check, and then you have to go through a second temperature check, and then you're limited to a certain place in the ground. And all of that sort of thing had to be thought up, and the logistics to do that in a short space of time was quite remarkable. To think like we started being impacted in March, middle of March here. We locked down on the 23rd of March, I think, as a country. And the first game of the season was meant to be in the second week of June. It ended up being in the first week of July, but they managed to put together this in 3 months, which was quite extraordinary. And as such, they managed to put on the entire men's international summer, and they created a women's series against West Indies.
Yes.
Obviously, none of it would have been possible without the incredible team spirit, community spirit of Cricket West Indies, Pakistan Cricket Board, Cricket Australia, Cricket Ireland, all sending their players, and the players coming over, particularly from the West Indies, because the Caribbean has not really been affected by COVID.
Yes.
So they were flying into an area which was at the peak of its pandemic to play cricket behind closed doors, away from their families, isolated for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, including their training camp. So that was quite phenomenal. But yeah, it was meant to be a massive summer following on from the World Cup win. The 100
Yeah.
was meant to launch as well in July, and in the end, we had an international summer, which was weird to say the least, and we had some semblance of a domestic season, but the game has still lost £100 million, and the ECB are having to shed 62 jobs as a result. And as far as we're aware, the counties between them have lost around about £75 million, for various reasons, for different revenue streams being cut off. So the game has been seriously impacted, and then right the way down to grassroots levels, where we're seeing so many clubs, just village clubs, struggling, players not being able to play, or money not coming in because they can't host any bar events, any weddings, they can't hire out their venues. So it's been a very, very difficult summer, but we still managed to see quite a lot of cricket,
Yes.
which is a really strange sort of balance between the good and the bad of what's happened here since March.
Did you have any remote sense of hope that the game is going to happen in the month of March? Because you must have panicked, right? I mean, cricket is not just a game, right? It's an economy, right? It's an economy of journalists, pubs, bars, events, stadiums, clubs, right? So, what was going on in your mind as a journalist in the month of March, April?
Well, so my position at the Cricketer also involves an element of executive level, so organisation within the company. So it was as much about future-proofing the Cricketer as it was about the game as a whole. But obviously, the way in which the game works had a direct influence on what we produce as a magazine and a website. So March and April were basically spent trying to, well, certainly March and early April, coming up with a plan of how to create content around cricket when there is no cricket. You know, it's strange to have been a publication about a specific event, a specific activity that just didn't happen for 3 months anywhere in the world, with the exception of Vanuatu. I think they had a T10 or a T20 tournament out over there, but apart from there was no cricket anywhere for 3 months. So having to come up with ideas that would create some content that people would want to consume, that people would engage with, that people would want to buy when it comes to the magazine was certainly interesting. And I think we've done pretty well. We've come through it. Obviously not in as rude a health as we were before we started, but we haven't had to lose any jobs. We haven't put ourselves in financial difficulty as a result. But it certainly tested our originality. You know, we launched a PS4 competition involving county players in April, which we called the Quarantine Cup, and streamed them on YouTube with real commentary from real commentators, which also allowed us to put money back into the freelance cricket journalist community who've been struggling so much during this time as well. We celebrated the greatest books that cricket has produced in the magazine. We celebrated the efforts of the cricket community with our Lockdown Heroes Awards, of picking out stories of people doing good in the community over the course of lockdown. And we used the time to try and take action on some sort of social commentary issues like Black Lives Matter, in which we teamed up with The Voice newspaper, which is the leading black newspaper over here, to cover the West Indies series. And we teamed up with the Caribbean Cricket Podcast to cover the CPL, just trying to give opportunities to more voices across more platforms, and taking the chance to do things differently when we've been given a completely new landscape to deal with. So it threw up its challenges, but I think that we reacted to them pretty well. And 4, 5, 6 months on, whatever it is now, feels like an absolute lifetime.
Right.
We've started to come through it. I think now we're just looking at a winter where there's no fixtures yet again.
Yes.
So we're back to where we were in May. No fixtures, nothing in the calendar. What are you planning?
I was hoping your team would come down to India and all that in the winter, right? So because I'm a big fan of white ball England cricket team, big fan. I was there in the 2019 World Cup at Birmingham. India was England.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I was at that game as well. Yeah.
Um, what a strange summer, right? Last summer, this summer, and did you happen to get into the bubble? What was that like in all the cricket journalism career that you had? Last that bubble bio bubble time must have been the most strangest time, right? I mean, I was reading some news, right? So you had this pathways that you have to follow to go and eat breakfast. You have to stand if you're standing behind in an elevator, you have to face the mirror, not the door. All these rules, right? It must is how was that like?
To be fair, the journalists don't stay in the hotels like the players do, so they come and
Okay.
go into different areas. So
Sorry to interrupt, but let me just make it clear, right? So you had matches at AGS Bowl and Manchester's
mm,
Old Trafford, and
hmm
because the hotel was attached to the stadium,
yeah,
so there is no commute, and players had direct access, and it's the same
yeah,
case in Manchester. So you
yeah.
were talking about your experience in AGS Bowl and Southampton, yeah?
Yeah, so but the journalists did not stay. The written press did not stay
Okay.
in those biosecure hotels. The broadcast journalists, so TV did and radio did,
Hmm.
but the written press would come and go from the stadium to a nearby hotel every day. But they obviously wouldn't have any contact with anyone who was staying within the venue.
Hmm.
So basically, you're segregated into different parts, different zones, depending on whether you need to come and go and what sort of access to the facilities you have to have.
Right.
So we didn't quite get the same experience in that sense
Hmm.
as the players would have done in having those meals exactly separated. But social distancing has become such a norm over here.
Yeah.
The use of face masks is now a societal norm, and it's law over here in enclosed spaces anyway. So it's all become kind of second nature, I guess. After a while, it was certainly weird to start with, just
Hmm.
the whole process of covering a game with no fans, and it's very hard to write about. The fans make cricket what it
Yes.
is to write about. Atmosphere is a huge part of cricket writing. Whilst you can write analytically and tactically, you could do that from the TV. So there's not a great deal of reason for journalists to be at a biosecure venue, because
Hmm.
there's not a lot of extra insight that they can offer that they couldn't do from the television. Um, which is another reason why we can't wait for fans to get let back in, because it becomes quite repetitive what you're writing about in these sorts of situations, apart from those who obviously write analytically
Hmm.
and those who write statistically, for which there's obviously always lots to write about. So that was particularly strange. It felt hollow. It felt like the soul wasn't there. The action was fantastic. There were
Yes.
so many good games of cricket that TV audiences could be entertained by, but it wasn't right. Particularly the white ball stuff. The tests sort of felt like they could just about get by without crowds, because we've seen, when there's been games played in the UAE, for
Hmm.
instance, when Pakistan have been playing there's very, very rarely many fans in
Hmm.
those venues. So we've seen that sort of thing. But white ball cricket, we're used to quite raucous atmospheres, and you just can't generate that on television by tubed crowd noise. It doesn't work. So that was certainly something that just felt jarring. It felt a bit wrong. And hopefully next summer we can get back to what we've been used
Right.
to seeing for so many years. Although who knows, with the spike that we're having again over here, we don't know what's going to happen come April and May next year.
How many more ripping yarns would you write if the 2019 Ashes was happening in 2020, or the 2019 World Cup was happening in 2020, right? It's the atmosphere, crowd makes that match special more than anything else.
And not just the match as well. It's the build up to it, and after it. I was at the India Pakistan game at Old Trafford during the World Cup in June last year, and it was just that the build up to it was just as exciting as being in there. The roads outside being absolutely rammed with colour and noise and music, and people being willing to express themselves, and that makes for a sporting occasion. That's
Yeah.
that tribal aspect that really generates excitement around it, and no one can do that at the moment. And basically, for reasons that we understand, the fun is being sucked out of just about everything, and sport is so much about fun, and if you don't have the fun element of it, then it's not the proper experience that people should be growing up learning to love.
I, f-
So
I feel so sad for my Indian cricket fans, including myself, because IPL is not happening in India, right? It's
yeah. And that you can, I mean, obviously you can pipe it over. Same with the CPL in the Caribbean. They tried their best, and you put some noise into it, but you just know that it's not it's not the same. And you
Yes.
know that the communities where the games are being played, obviously not in India in this case, but it would have been, then
Mm.
they're missing out so much on the experience, and young people are missing out on the opportunity to fall in love with the sport and
Yes.
to get absolutely mesmerized by those big match day experiences. And let's hope it's only 1 year, because every year that goes by with the diluted sporting atmospheres around the world is
Yes.
another year where young people are going to lose interest with our games, and that can only have a negative effect, not just on the sport but on society in general.
Precisely. And regardless of all this, right? You must have been impressed by the West Indies cricket board and the West Indies cricket players, right? So obviously, 3, 4 players didn't come, like Hetmeyer didn't come, but big heart, right? Big heart from the Caribbean players to come down, stay here for a couple of weeks, and then play 4 weeks. I think you could witness the toll on their mental on the mental side in the third and the second and the third test matches, right? Their bowlers were not really putting the 100%. Maybe that isolation was taking a toll on them, if I'm not wrong.
I think you're right, and actually, the ECB have identified the fact that asking players to be in a biosecure bubble for that long is detrimental to their mental well-being. Physically, I think that particularly the fast bowlers, someone like Shannon Gabriel would have been suffering because he was asked to bowl very quickly for
Yes.
3 back-to-back Test matches, and that's just a physical strain which you would expect any fast bowler to struggle with a little bit. That probably came with who they had in their squad and the fact that he bowled so well in the first Test match. It's kind of a tricky position for them to be in. But the mental side of it, certainly 6 weeks in isolation in a country far, far away from home at the peak of a pandemic, behind closed doors, and with, albeit people that you get on with and know pretty well, but there's still only 25 or 30 of them. And there's not a lot of opportunity to speak to people if you've got an issue. Who would you speak to? Your family aren't there, and having a Zoom conversation is obviously not as cathartic as having an actual in-person embrace. So there's a lot of things to think about for the ECB, and they would probably say now that they wouldn't want to put players through more than 3 weeks in a bubble, from what they've seen over the course of the summer here, be that England's players or those from touring countries, because it just seems a little bit unfair on these guys who've come so far and to do such a good thing for English cricket at a time as well when the West Indies players have been told that they were taking a 50% pay cut too. So
Yes.
and obviously CWI get nothing out of being in England. They don't get the share of any receipt there. So it was incredibly community spirited for them to come across and to put themselves through 6 difficult weeks. Obviously, in the grand scheme of things, they were in a very comfortable hotel and well fed and well watered, etc. But we have to accept that the context of it is still such that they would have found those times very difficult. And to put on the performances that they did in those situations,
Especially
particularly
in
winning
the
that first test.
first test match, that's like,
Yeah.
even though England lost, right? I think you can kind of say that the cricket won, right? It was, the message was beautiful with the Black Lives Matter thing, and then the fact that
Yeah.
West Indies won, and that must be really satisfying. After all the effort, that match must have been really satisfying, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it would only take a very, very stringent England fan to say that wasn't the result that cricket needed at the start of the summer.
Yes.
And it set the series up nicely. It gave reward for West Indies for coming over. It showed that Cricket West Indies are creating a more sustainable future for their Test team. They've obviously got talented players who could fill in. You're missing Bravo and Paul and Hetmeyer, but still come over and win your first Test, having not played in a while in a strange environment in England in English bowling conditions. It was fantastic performance, but it came too much, came too fast for a squad that had been away from home for that period of time. I think ultimately they started falling apart a little bit towards the end of that series, though still in parts very impressive. It slowly deteriorated as every day of that tour went on. You could see them visibly tiring more and more, which is, there's no shame in that. But we'll see what happens next, I guess.
Right.
See what happens when England have to go abroad and whether they have to go into a biosecure bubble, as likely will happen In the UAE, I think it will be, although India want it obviously to be in India in February and March.
Right.
But if it is in the UAE, then if England are having to do 5 tests in biosecure conditions, that's going to be a hell of an
No.
ask.
Yes. And Pakistan visiting England was a strange one, right? Because like 8, 9 players of their team were like tested positive, and for them to even come down and play, right? And they almost got the first test match in their hand, and they were robbed by Chris Folks.
Yeah, so the PCB did very well to get them over. Obviously, Pakistan was in a lot worse a position in terms of COVID-19 than the West
Yeah.
Indies. So they were trying to manage it themselves to get over, and they did very well logistically to get a squad over for both red and white ball tours. And they had players that performed fantastically at certain times. So Shan Masood's 150 in that first innings was a terrific knock. And I thought Mohammed Rizwan was excellent throughout the series.
Find of the Pakistani batting order in this test series, Mohammed Rizwan. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just with the bat, keeping. If you compare his keeping, which was pretty good, there's a lot of dip and swerve after the ball passes the stumps in England. And he managed to do that particularly well. And given the performance of his West Indian counterpart earlier in the season, you could really give him high praise. So I thought he was excellent. And again, that bowling attack is fantastic to watch. It's a really, really enjoyable team to have over here. And I think it's just about time that England go and tour Pakistan. And after they came here during this season to help save a lot of money, I think it's around about £20 million, £30 million per test that they would have saved coming over here.
Right.
Then I think it's just about time that England went back. They haven't been there since 2005, and there's probably very little reason why they shouldn't be going when the FTP schedule says they should be going, which I think is early 2020.
21.
21.
Okay.
Yeah. It might be late 20. It's either late 21 or early 22.
2005 England team toured Pakistan and lost, right? It was after that famous Ashes Test series,
Yes,
right? They
that's
went to
right.
Pakistan.
Yes.
Michael Vaughan. Okay.
Yes, there's that one, and it hasn't been since. Obviously, they've been to the UAE to play them many times, but they haven't been back to Pakistan. I went to Pakistan for the PSL, so I went to Multan and Lahore in February, which seems just mad thinking about. I managed to get out to Pakistan now, given all that's happened since. And my experience there is that there is no reason why an international team can't come and tour, as many others have started to do with Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. South Africa are due to go there too, Zimbabwe. So there's plenty of precedent now, and it's time that the ECB finally put some actions in place to go and repay the PCB for what they've done.
And as you said rightly, right? I mean, England and Australia white ball series must have been the kind of series where you badly missed the fans.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the funny thing is with the England-Australia series is there seems to be so many of them at the moment. I think they've been over here 5 of the last 8 years for one series or another, and it gives a bit of overkill. Whereas, at least with an Ashes series in Australia, they still seem to be once every 4 years. That's the big one, I think, from an English perspective, is that one is so well spread out that it becomes something special every time. Whereas we're quite used to seeing the Australians over here. And unless the cricket is absolutely mesmerizing, then they can become a little bit forgettable.
Yeah.
So yes, it would be better to have the fans here, but I think that cricket fans would much rather have variety and to see different teams come and play over here where possible. I think that there are many teams in the world that could give England just as good a game, and would give an opportunity for the English fans and of course expats over here, and we have home to so many fans from Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, India, Pakistan, New Zealand, South Africa. A little bit more variety would be fantastic. So the series was good in fits and spurts, and there were some nice storylines. There was some good cricket played, and obviously it is a big headline thing that England lost a 50-over
Yeah.
series, because that very rarely happens. But I would say that the red ball element of the summer at the start was much more engaging for the cricket community over here than the white ball element at the back end.
Right. Australia touring England often is like, we complain the same thing with Sri Lanka, right? Sri Lanka and India used to play a lot. We were like, we were joking, like, if India wants a picnic, they go to Sri Lanka to play. That was a joke around right here.
It's just the same. It just gets too much. It's the same because you're just seeing the same players play the same match over and over again, and that's not what you want to, as a consumer. You don't want to be watching the same thing all the time. You want to be able to see different things, because otherwise you're never going to get to learn more about the game. So whilst these games are always fun against Australia, they would be more fun if they were less frequent.
Right. And number one complaint that Indians have with matches in England is, see, obviously, I love the fact that England is the best place to have a World Cup, because there is a sizable amount of fandom for every team over there, because it is this melting pot, right? Every team has their reasonable size of fan base. You probably won't get that in Australia. If the World Cup is happening in Australia, Indians will be everywhere, but you won't get a bunch of South African fans filling up a stadium in Australia or in Sri Lanka or India, right? England is like this melting pot, right? That is the one thing I love about England, and that was a wonderful thing about 2019 England World Cup, where many crowds turned up for most matches. The thing I don't like about is what you do with rain and bad light. Bad light is bad light is more of an ICC issue, I agree. But with the rain, right? I mean, you're one of the richest countries in the world. Like, have a freaking cover that can cover the whole ground and start immediately, right? So what's stopping you there? Especially we were very annoyed in the 2019 World Cup. So yeah,
Yeah. I mean, whilst I understand,
the England weather beat the India in semi-final. Come on.
it wasn't nice. It wasn't. That's true. I think India's top order probably didn't do themselves a huge amount of favor in that game.
Of course.
The idea of covers across it comes, doesn't it, from when you look at Sri Lanka and this particularly, and how they react to things over there. Probably the least well off of these countries that do it, maybe Bangladesh aside, and they can cover the pitches in a matter of seconds with an army of ground staff and massive tyres holding down tarpaulins and stuff like that. There's various reasons over here why counties don't believe it necessary. One is that they've invested substantially in irrigation and drainage, so that the runoffs in the outfield should cater in normal wet conditions. So not when it's particularly heavy rain, but in normal conditions. Once it's drained off the square, it should drain them through into the outfield. And it does for a large amount of the time. When it is excessively wet, as was the case a couple of times during the Pakistan series, that tests the irrigation process a little bit. Another is the nature of the grass in the UK. And if you put it under complete cover at that low level for a long period of time, it might create a certain amount of rot, which would cause some damage to the outfield. So it's not necessarily going to, in the medium to long term, be beneficial, though it could result in getting a game on quicker.
Right.
It might then create more issues for ground staff, and they'd have to reinvest in more turf more turf replacement later down the line. There's arguments for and against, but if you speak to ground staff over here, they will say that it would be counterproductive and overly expensive to do what they do in Sri Lanka or in India or where else. You have to think about the manpower and obviously the wage requirements for putting in an army of ground staff to be able to bring those covers on in the time that would be necessary for them to be effective. Wages over here are obviously very different to wages elsewhere, and whether or not those could be afforded. The investment in the covers is another thing. Those covers would only be typically used for international games. So if you brought those covers, you'd have to, which would not be inexpensive. They certainly wouldn't just be plastic sheeting. It would be much more sturdy stuff, and it would cost quite a lot of money. Who would be responsible for that? Would it be the counties that would be responsible? Would the ECB purchase it? Who would maintain it? And if the counties had to maintain it, even though they weren't using it because they couldn't afford the number of ground staff that would be needed to bring them on and off then what would be the point? Would there actually be a good financial return for them? Or would it just be a white elephant that's costing them money, when realistically the amount of play that is lost to rain over here is, whilst it seems like we have a huge amount of it, it's really not actually that bad. So there have been very, very few washout tests in the last 20 years. Obviously, there was one this year, but there's very, very few. So there are all those reasons why those sorts of covers aren't used. But from a spectator's perspective, those looking in from outside, yes, of course, it's incredibly frustrating.
Yes.
And it's not the natural course of things to start thinking about grass rot or the benefit cost analysis of cover investment for counties. That doesn't come into the conversation when you want to watch cricket and it's raining and they haven't put more covers down. Then that's just very frustrating, isn't it?
Yes.
So I can understand both perspectives, but there is at least genuine reason why England doesn't do what other countries do. It's not just that they're trying to be difficult or trying to be unique or whatever. Though I know that we can be difficult as a country, but in this particular instance, that's not the case. There is good reason.
Right. You talk about frustration, right? I'll tell you an example of frustration, right? So I think the semi-final was split into two parts, right? India was New Zealand semi-final in the Manchester, and on the second day, the word Manchester weather was the most Googled word on Google. Because there are 1 billion search requests coming out from
it was a funny old place. I tell you what, I was frantically Googling hotels in Manchester on the first evening. I hadn't got a hotel to stay in for a reserve day. I ended up in the most miserable airport hotel on the outskirts of it. But yeah, it was a strange couple of days, that one. But
Number one thing. I opened my Twitter. Number one thing trending on Twitter: Manchester weather. I opened Google News. Number one thing trending on the Google News: Manchester weather. On the Facebook, Manchester weather. So it was very funny.
It will never happen again, I don't think.
Yes,
that search term will ever be at the top of Google. That's the one and only time.
Right. That's the point of calling it in the history.
Yeah.
Right. Best moments of this cricket summer, right? So I had a few list. I thought Vokes's innings, Anderson's 600, Broad's 500, Ollie Pope, Crawley's innings. These were my 5. What do you think really? What do you think really are the best moments of this summer, which was worthwhile?
From an international perspective, I mean, there were lots of them. To see players performing at the level that they did was really, really quite impressive. Joss Butler's century was a breakthrough moment for him.
Yes.
He went into this summer actively saying that he recognised that he was playing for his place and came up with some really important innings. Not just the partnership with Wokes for that victory in Manchester, but another century as well. So that was really good for me. Ireland's victory in the third ODI in Southampton when they chased down 300 odd for loss of 2 wickets, and Paul Sterling and Andrew Balbirnie getting centuries. That was quite special actually, and a big breakthrough moment. It's also the start of the World Cricket League. Whether or not that manages to properly continue in this cycle, I don't know. But it also showed that gives Ireland and other smaller nations a reason to be.
What is this weird thing about teams chasing down with England? Right? I mean, Scotland once chased down England some 300 odd, and then Ireland.
Yeah. Well, teams have to raise their game, don't they?
Yeah.
When they're playing against that England white ball team, they have to up their game. Otherwise, they've got absolutely no chance. And so I guess that it is always possible, but it creates a great spectacle.
Yes.
Even if fans aren't allowed in, you're right that teams do have to up their game. So, but that was particularly special for the Irish to get that victory and get some points on the board in the World Cricket League. And it was a good day. I really enjoyed watching Shannon Gabriel bowl in the first first test of the summer, and I very much enjoyed watching Shaheen Afridi bowl later on. His delivery that bowled Bairstow during the T20s was something else.
Oh yeah.
The in-swinging Yorker, which Bairstow just didn't even see, that was pretty phenomenal. I loved watching Adil Rashid bowl as well over the course of the back end of the summer. He looks to be in the form of his life, over his shoulder injury, and bowling all his variations at anywhere between 45 and 60 miles an hour. I'm sorry, I can't translate that into kph. I don't know that off the top of my head, but he was great, and really interesting to see how he's developed again. He seems to just be getting better the older that he's
I
getting.
I just cannot believe how he's not hired into IPL, right? I mean, Zampa is an IPL, foreign leg spinners, right? Tahir is an IPL. I mean, Rashid was kind of like no-brainer. Is he like putting his name in the IPL list or
I,
not?
I don't know, and I don't know whether his connections with Pakistan have anything to do with it at all.
Oh, okay.
But then again, Mo is obviously playing for RCB,
Yeah.
so there's no direct reason. It might
Yeah.
be that he preferred to stay over here.
Mm.
I'm speculating. I don't know for sure, but
Mm.
yes, he was. I mean, he's certainly a better T20 bowler
Yeah.
than Adam Zampa.
Yeah.
That's for sure. But these things can have many reasons why
Mm.
he's not there. It might have been that at the time of this particular auction, he was struggling with his shoulder and
Mm.
wasn't down. I can't remember back then as to what was going on, but he certainly does seem to be getting better and better. And it won't be long before we start hearing calls that he should be in the test squad for the India series as well.
Right.
Given that there's, well, particularly if it's played in India, given the need for a spinner that can actually do
Yeah.
something with the ball. So we'll see. But yeah, great to watch. I hope that he never retires.
Uh, and one more thing I loved about like this Anderson's 600th wicket was such a suspense, right? Because the last day, will the game happen? Will the game not happen? If Anderson does not get 600th wicket now, I don't know when he'll play the next Test match again. Probably next Ashes. Who knows? All these things. I mean, I was watching just for Anderson. I was watching TV on that day.
Yeah, it's a hell of an achievement, isn't it, for a
Yeah.
fast bowler to take the number of wickets that he's taken over the course of a Test career. His Test career is now 17 years old. Like it's a long time that he's been involved in that England side, and he's still producing the goods. And what was particularly fitting about this summer was that once again people were questioning him. He had a very bad test against Pakistan early in the series. People were asking whether he should be still in the team, and then he comes back and shows exactly why he should be there. And he's got a central contract again for another year, so
Yeah.
we'll expect to see him in whichever Test matches actually take place over the next 12 months. Be that here in India, in the UAE. They might try to go to Sri Lanka for a couple of tests, which were due to be played in March but got abandoned. And then next summer, whether or not the English season happens as planned or not, I don't know. But expect to see him involved in whatever red ball cricket England play in the next 12 months.
Right. And Broad's 500, right? So, like, when that happened, I remember Yuvraj Singh tweeting about him, right? Like, look at this champion bowler. I congratulate him. That tweet reminded me how old I am, right? Because I was a little kid when the six sixes happened with Yuvraj Singh and Stuart Broad. I was studying for exam, and people were clapping. And then I went to the TV and I saw, okay, already two sixes were done. So I saw the rest of the four, and from there to come back and now his 500th wicket, right? What a journey, what a pair. And one of the half of the reason why I watched England cricket on TV, because obviously there was no cricket in the pandemic, half was because Anderson and Broad were bowling in England, right? They are a treat to watch, especially in England.
Yeah, he's remarkable. He's become a different bowler again. He goes through evolutions, Stuart Broad, and England have used him in different ways at different times. You know, when he came into the side, he was a burgeoning all rounder, and he hit that 169 against Pakistan in 2010 at Lords, and then he sort of, well, we know what happened after he got hit by Varun Aaron. Lost his bowling, and his batting, and then he became an enforcer with the ball.
Mm-hmm.
He's always been able to get wickets in clusters and produce match-defining spells, and he's continued to do that this summer as well. And now he's rediscovering his batting to go with his bowling, and he looks so carefree at the moment. It looks like everything is so enjoyable for him, and I think that must be quite important. But yeah, he keeps coming and coming and coming, and he was at pains over the summer to remind people not to bunch him in with Jimmy Anderson in terms of the age bracket, because there's almost 3 years between them.
Yes.
So Broad's 34, and thinks that he's probably got at least as long as Anderson plays for England left in him. So that could be another 4-year cycle. So it could be 2024 before we really see Stuart Broad retiring. And England will want him to hold on, because he too seems to be getting better as he gets older, just like Anderson has got.
Just like wine.
Yes, just like wine. They're fine wines. Eventually, they'll be gone, though. And England have started to look into what happens next. And obviously, Jofra Archer will be at the focal point of that. But there's certainly a need to find more than one or two seamers, and they actually are there in abundance in the county system. So I think that England are relatively well set in that respect. But cricket fans over here won't want to see Broad or Anderson retiring anytime soon.
Right. What is your comment on the performance abroad, right? So numbers obviously change, right? When Anderson and Broad go abroad. You can say Broad is slightly better because he can, bowl cutters that can grip on the surface and or foreign conditions in a bit. But what do you comment and tell fans outside of England who think that Broad and Anderson are just tailor-made for England, and it not much effective outside England?
Well, they have taken wickets outside of England, and everyone, any swing bowler, any seam bowler, is going to enjoy bowling in English conditions, just as they should enjoy bowling to an extent down in New Zealand. Just as bowlers with genuine pace would enjoy bowling in Australia and in South Africa. People have different conditions. There are different conditions in the world of cricket. That's what makes cricket such a good game. And people who grow up in one area are always going to be naturally a bit better at what they're used to. And of course, you can understand why people would say, oh, they're made for English conditions. But they are made for English conditions. They were born in English conditions. They've grown up in English conditions. They developed in English conditions. And when they go abroad, they have to change their game and adapt to the environments they find themselves in. And sometimes it works well, because they both had very good tours at times all over the world. And at times it doesn't work so well.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunately when they get picked up as being this one-dimensional seamer who can only take wickets in one area of the planet. So, yeah, sure. Yes, there are reasons why people could say it, but look, they've got more than 1,100 test wickets between them, and you don't do that if you can only bowl on green seamers in England. That just wouldn't happen. It just wouldn't work like that.
And people don't point the same fact with, for example, Australian bowlers, right? For example, Stark is that champion bowler in Australia, and he kind of struggles in England, right? Even Mitchell Johnson also, right? The champion in Australia.
Mitchell Johnson certainly. Stark with the white ball over here has certainly caused problems. He certainly caused problems in the World Cup.
And red, red. I'm talking about red, yeah.
Yeah. So everyone has their strengths and weaknesses in different parts of the world, and I think instead of trying to necessarily pick apart opposition bowlers, as we're inclined to do as fans of certain countries, we should probably celebrate the diversity of skill that is on show all across the planet. India should be absolutely congratulated for the fact they've put together somehow a supreme seam bowling attack from a country that is not typically known for it. And obviously you look at people like Bhuvneshwar Kumar, Jasprit Bumrah, Mohammed Shami, and the fact that they can come over here and be just as effective as doing it back in India is mighty impressive. But that's a freak bowling attack for India. That's not something that you guys have got used to over the course of years. And it might not come again. It might be that this is the peak Indian seam era and that it won't happen in the future. So only if you're then going to be able to go and say when the next load of Indian seamers don't quite have the same effect over overseas that they're only made for Indian conditions, but Indian fans wouldn't say that. So it's just a rivalry thing. I think it's tribalism, and it's fine to do it. But I think you look at the overall stats, and
Right.
you've got to celebrate bowlers who have performed majestically over very long periods of time, because to do that at elite level sports is quite remarkable endurance feat, both physically and mentally as well.
Right. And one more thing that is really favorite for me about England team is you use the word diversity, right? So diversity, right? You have an Irish captain, a Kiwi all-rounder who won you a World Cup, a South African opener who gave you great starts, a Muslim leg spinner. So and why do you think in such a society there were still people who were complaining about that Black Lives Matter message when that West Indies series happened, right? So and also there is some some issue going on with racial treatment in some counties, I believe. If I'm not wrong, I have read the news very vaguely. So good and bad, right? So it is very diverse, but there are still work to be done, isn't it?
I think there's always work to be done
Mm.
with regards to inequality within society, and cricket is part of that inequality. And over here, it's plenty to do with class as much as it is to do with race, though the two can become intrinsically intertwined.
Mm.
Over here, we certainly do have an issue with diversity at board level and within coaching. That's something that's being worked on. The ECB are very aware of it, very actively engaging in the situation at the moment. The sort of the racial abuse matters that you've touched on are related to incidents in the last sort of 10 years. So Azim Rafiq, who was at Yorkshire, has spoken out recently
Yes.
about his treatment, and there have been several others like Michael Carberry who have spoken about their experiences with racism in the game. And it's something that has always been there, and needs education, it needs reform, it needs cultural change, but it's hard to get through to people that
Yeah.
Black Lives Matter is not necessarily a political slogan, though it has. I think the issue that people had is that, well, some people had, is that it was adopted in parts by some political movements. But the three words in a sentence just seems so strikingly obvious that it's ludicrous that anyone could say that it's wrong to suggest that. But people like to pick holes in these sorts of things, and I thought it was quite strong of the ECB and of Sky particularly to push that message throughout the course of the summer, relentlessly and unafraid of any criticism that would come their way. It's important that people discuss equality, and it has led to more and more engagement, not just from the ECB, but all the way down to us. We recognise as a company, as a publication, that we are an all male company. We are all white. Many of us are middle class, and it has actively driven us to look at what we can do to do better in that regard, and to how our processes are put in place to make sure that we don't just create a cycle of normality which doesn't reflect the community in which we operate, in the community we're trying to engage. So that's just one way in which the message has got through on a very personal level, and it's getting through, I think, wider across the game, and
Right.
that is an important part of this summer, and certainly something that won't be forgotten in a hurry.
Just one of the most beautiful monologues, right? Michael Holding, Nasser Hussain speaking on that Sky thing. That was really powerful. That, and with Ebony, is that her name?
Ebony Rainford Brent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a last topic to discuss, right? How do you see England's red ball cricket team's future, right? Is it going in the right direction? I mean, I felt some of the positives were like Zach Crawley, right? Zach Crawley reminded me of Kevin Peterson when I was a little boy watching that 2005 Ashes. Kevin Peterson just smashing the Aussies, and he kind of reminded me the kind of busyness he has on the crease, right? And he can play himself, he can play within himself when the time is needed, but generally he's a very busy player, always on the front foot attacking. And one more positive was like Ollie Pope, very resilient guy in the down the order, played a very important innings. And obviously you said Butler, right? Butler was this close to losing his place in the team, and that innings, if not for that innings, right, I don't think we would have seen Butler in red ball for quite a while.
Yeah, absolutely possible. I think the English Red Bull team is in a bit of a funny place. It's winning quite a lot of matches, and but it's lost a few too. So I think Joe Root is starting to establish himself as a captain. He's starting to understand the role a bit more, and with it, he's developing a team in the image that he wants to take forwards with him. So it's moving away from Alistair Cook's team and turning into Joe Root's team now, and that's important. And it is good that England have got some young players. I think Ollie Pope is destined to score quite a lot of runs at Test level. I'm not quite as convinced by Zach Crawley, though. I know that he produced that incredible double hundred. I think there's still some more work for him to do, but it certainly looked promising that he could fit in and play that sort of innings against that sort of attack against Pakistan. And England are wanting a good number three for Australia. That works in Australian conditions, and obviously Crawley is 6'4", 6'5", can get on top of the bouncing ball, which would be important in places like Perth. But we'll see how he develops over the course of the next year. I'm more set on Pope being in England's number 6 for some time to come, and I think that Root, Stokes, Pope middle order, with now Butler seems to sort of secured his spot, though you could argue for Butler to be at 6 because that's where he's been scoring his runs. But there is plenty to be positive about, and there have been contributions at the top of the order from Sibley and Burns on a regular basis too. Spin bowling is a bit of an uncertain one for England at the moment. So obviously Don Bess was in the position during the course of the summer. And bowled with discipline, but didn't look particularly dangerous at any point. I don't think that you would have Don Bess as your strike bowler on a tour of the subcontinent, for instance. Jack Leach gives obviously a very different angle and a different option against a team that might be packed full of right-handers, but they didn't use him against a West Indies team that was plenty full of right-handers, or the Pakistanis. So then there's a case of who else would come in, and there are obviously other options, Moeen or Rashid, or if Rashid wants to play red ball again. And then further down there in the county system, there are some young spinners, Matt Parkinson, for example, of Lancashire.
Love that guy. Yeah.
He's and there's lots more like him around the counties. So we'd like to see Mason Crane as well. Has had a very good summer. Yeah, down at Hampshire, he had a very good summer. He'd struggled with stress fractures in his back.
He toured Australia, right? He went to Ashes, right?
In 2017, he made his Test debut in Sydney in the last Test of that awful tour. But so there are options, but spin bowling is where it is going to be interesting to see how it develops. I think there's enough seamers in the pack there beyond Broad and Anderson that if Broad and Anderson did suddenly go over a hill, then you've still got Wokes, Wood, Archer. Ollie Robinson is a terrific young bowler.
Sam Curran.
So there's lots. Sam Curran, there's a lot of them around the place that can give lots of different options for the selectors. So I think the main concern for them will be spin bowling.
Yes. Joe Root's batting order, where will he bat?
20 runs. Joe Root's, he prefers to bat 4. It depends what they want to do with Zach Crawley. It depends where they want to play Butler in the order as well. And it depends on how many bowlers they want to have. So there's lots of things that come into this side. And I don't think we're ever going to see a huge consistency of selection in terms of that. And I think that Root might just have to get used to bouncing around a bit, which is obviously not ideal. But he is technically the best. Him or Ben Stokes are technically the best batsman in that side, so they are capable of adapting. So yeah, I don't think it's a particularly brilliant England team, but it's certainly not a bad England red ball team either. They'll continue to win a fair number of games. They'll continue to lose a fair number of games, and I don't think they'll draw many.
I that is the reason why me as an Indian fan was so disappointed when India toured England and lost it, right? It was 3-1 as a result, but it's not really 3-1, right? It's like 3-1 out of which 2-1 was Sam Curran, and Sam Curran made it 2-0, and one match India lost it, one match India won it. So we hate Sam Curran, by the way. just kidding. The CSK fans love him, but yeah.
Yeah, it's an entertaining team to watch. There's always going to be something funny that happens. That they're either going to be brilliant or they're going to be pretty poor,
or they will lose match that they had no business of winning, or they will win the match that they should have won very easily. They would make it so tough for themselves.
Yeah, but it makes a great TV, doesn't it? That's a good thing about it. Yeah, they're a good team to watch, and I think that's an important part of any sports team, is that they're entertaining to watch. Yes, you want them to be winning every game, but realistically, there are very few teams in the history of the sport that have.
What is the beauty of following a team when there are no frustrations with it?
Exactly.
Sam, what a fun podcast this has been. We can go on and talk for hours about England cricket. Hopefully we can catch up in the future when actually cricket again comes back to England. Thank you very much for time. Thank you very much for your time, Sam. You have any parting message for the listeners that are listening to this about England cricket and what we can look forward to? There is 100. Vitality has concluded its blast very recently, right? So what can we look forward to in terms of cricket from the UK?
Well, obviously we now have to, for the English season, we have to wait till April now. Hopefully we'll see England's men in South Africa in November and December, and playing India somewhere in the world in February and March. And the women are due to go to New Zealand in February as well. So there's hopefully be some international cricket involving England to watch, and then next year it'll be an interesting one. Hopefully we'll see the start of the 100. Obviously it was meant to start this year, but it's been pushed back to next year, and that'll be interesting to see how that fits in with the county season. But I think trying to discuss what's going to happen next summer at the moment feels a little bit pointless.
Yeah. And it may be pointless, but there is also Ashes next year. You have to tour. Yeah,
there is exactly, and that's a big old block now. It's going to be a T20 World Cup in October, going into a 5-test Ashes series. That's going to be a hell of a summer hell of a winter, for some of the people who are touring in both of those tours. So plenty to look forward to.
I had tickets for T20 World Cup for Australia this year, India versus England match in Melbourne, which was scheduled. And I have chosen not to ask for the refund. I'm still hopeful, and hopefully all the cricket fans are hopeful. And on that note, we can very well end this podcast. Thank you very much for listening, folks. If you've been listening for this long, tune into this space for more interesting guests. That's it from Sollu Kaburz podcast. Bye, everyone.